Hi guys, Brian from Boas here. Right now there's a bill in the US Congress that, if enacted, would drastically alter reptile keeping in America in a very bad way. Today I'm going to describe what's going on in Congress and how you can stop this overly restrictive legislation from being passed. If you've been watching my channel, you know that this isn't about politics. I never talk about politics, and I'd rather not talk about politics as much as I think there is huge amounts of things wrong with our government in the US. But once in a while politics and reptile keeping intersect, and in this case I thought I really needed to make this video and let you guys know what's going on if you haven't heard already, and hopefully we can do something about it. So you probably heard that back in 2012, 2013 there was something going on where a number of species of large constricting snake were added to a law called the Lacey Act. And the Lacey Act was originally enacted over 100 years ago to prevent transport of endangered species across state lines, and it was originally enacted, as far as I understand, to stop poaching of rare animals across state lines. But it was kind of co-opted in order to stop transport of large constrictors under the guise that there's these Burmese pythons in the Everglades, and we need to stop movement of these large, potentially dangerous animals across state lines. Although it seemed like a bait and switch, if you will, because the Burmese python issue was already established in the Everglades, and blocking transport of these animals, say from Virginia to West Virginia, would have nothing to do with solving the problem in the Everglades. It's a local problem that they should deal with on a local basis, etc. But unfortunately they added these species of snakes. Originally they added like 4 species, and then they added another 5 species. So there was a total of 9 species added to the Lacey Act, meaning it was illegal to transport them across state lines. And this includes Burmese pythons, reticulated pythons, several species of anaconda, and several other species. In fact, they even wanted to add boa constrictors, and they really pushed to try to get boa constrictors added to this legislation. But they figured that there's so many people keeping boa constrictors, there'd just be this huge, outrage about this, and they wouldn't be able to pass the law. So they didn't add the boa constrictors. And for several years, it was basically effectively illegal to move your large python or anaconda across state lines for whatever reason. So it effectively shut down the hobby working with these species, because why would you invest in a breeding operation of a species that you can only sell in your state because you can't sell it across state lines? And even if in a big state like California, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you live like in Wyoming or something that has a lower population, there's not that many people that would potentially want to acquire your offspring, and thus there'd be 0 points to actually breeding. So again, this law was the idea behind this law was supposedly for conservation in the Everglades, but it really had nothing to do with that. And unfortunately there are people out there that want to have reptile keeping banned, and people that are against, in some cases, keeping any animal. In fact, there are some people who are against using animals for any use, for food, for pets, or whatever other uses. And ultimately, they want no animals to be used by humans. But big snakes are an easy target because people perceive big snake keepers as being somewhat on the fringe and somewhat eccentric. So it's pretty easy to try to get these things banned, especially when you can claim that they're causing environmental damage in the Everglades, which unfortunately is true. However, banning them and blocking them to go across state lines would have nothing to do with solving the problem in the Everglades. So it was this huge overreach of power by the Fish and Wildlife Service, who are the agency of the government that enacts this Lacey Act. So there was a lawsuit put forward by the US ARC, or the United States Association of Reptile Keepers, and back around, I believe it was 2015, they were able to get these animals, the 9 species of large constrictors, removed from the Lacey Act. So at that point it was no longer illegal to transport them across state lines. And so people could work with retics and burms and anacondas and the other species again without needing to worry about taking them across state lines. And so some people thought that was the end of it, but unfortunately it's not the end of it. And people, people that have this agenda against reptile keeping will never stop until these animals are completely illegal, unfortunately. So we have to keep fighting them. And so the latest is that there is this new bill in the U.S. Congress, and it's called the America Competes Act. And COMPETES is an acronym for Creating Opportunities for Manufacturing Preeminence in Technology and Economic Strength. Okay, so this is this huge piece of legislation. That's right now it's in the U.S. House of Representatives. It could be voted on as early as next week, as far as I understand. And this bill is over 2,000 pages of dense legalese. And unfortunately, bills in Congress, they try to get all kinds of things stuck in there that really don't have much to do with what you would think that the bill is, because they say that this Competes Act is to basically improve the economic situation in America, to address the demand for silicon microchips, and some other things that have to do with manufacturing and commerce. So it sounds pretty benign on the surface, but deep buried in there are some clauses that basically would have a huge impact on snake keeping. And so if you go to the USARK website, or if you go to Fauna Classifieds or kingsnake.com, they have more information there. But I just want to basically give a rundown of if this bill is passed through the House, and then if it makes it through the Senate and becomes law, what's going to happen. So the first two things have to do with the Lacey Act and the interstate transport of these animals. So, taking it from New York to Connecticut or California to Nevada, or between any two or more U.S. states. So it would basically change the language of the Lacey Act to overcome the lawsuit from USARK. So when USARK sued, they were able to get the 9 constrictors removed because of basically a semantic technicality. The original language of the Lacey Act says that it would ban shipment between the continental United States. Okay, and so USARK argued that that meant not between the individual U.S. states, but between the entire continental United States, all of the 48 lower U.S. states and other territories. And that's why USARK was victorious in making it so you could now transport these species across the individual 48 continental United States. But they're going to change that clause to transport between the states. So it's clarifying that you can't bring any of these 9 species that they deem as injurious across any of the state boundaries, and it's pretty explicit. And this is for any reason, not just to sell them or to transport them to a new owner, but if you wanted to take your snake to a veterinarian in a different state, let's say you live in Connecticut and there's a veterinarian in New York who is a specialist on what you need for your particular animal, that would be illegal. It would be a violation of federal law for you to bring your snake to that veterinarian. Or if you move, and most of us move to several states over our lifetimes. I've lived in 5 different states. Every time I move, I brought my reptiles with me. But now it would be illegal for me to take any of the species that they deem as injurious because of the Lacey Act across the state line. So I would either need to try to rehome them in my state that I live in, or I would need to maybe give them to a humane society, which probably has way too many animals to deal with already, or I would have to have them euthanized. So it's just a terrible choice. And in fact, ironic as it seems, a lot of people would rather just set them free, because they don't want to have to deal with euthanizing. But setting an animal free in a new environment is the exact opposite of what people want who are supposedly the environmentalists behind this kind of legislation. I mean, that's what happened in the Everglades, and that's why they have the disaster there. So, just totally half-assed law, which has the exact opposite effects as, they're trying to say it should. Yeah, I mean, this stuff really keeps me up at night, and I have a lot of negative things I could say about our government, but this is just, one of the things that just really disturbs me and just really, gets me angry. Okay, so you can't bring them, you can't transport between states. They've made that explicit. It would also allow them, the Fish and Wildlife Service, new authority to use an emergency designation to add new species as injurious. So basically, it's streamlining the process by which the Fish and Wildlife Service can decide that a species is injurious. So they think the boa constrictor is injurious. Well, let's add that to the Lacey Act, and now you can't transport it between states. And so in the past, there was public input hearings, advance notice. There was kind of more of a process they had to go through, but this would streamline that. So Fish and Wildlife Service can pretty much just add whatever species that they deem is injurious based on whatever logic they want to use. So, you know, huge overreach of power. Okay, and so the other two things have to do with importation of, you know, foreign species. So let's face it, boa constrictors are not native to the US, and all of the animals we have were either imported or they descend from a line of imports. And this, with locality boas, this is especially true because a lot of these animals are just, you know, 1 or 2 generations removed from the original imports. Some cases they are the imports. So we depend on importation. And if there's not importation, the locality boa hobby will effectively end, because we need this fresh source of genes to keep our captive populations, you know, on par or, you know, similar to the wild populations. Because if you have a population of boas breeding in captivity, with each generation it's going to be a little bit less like the wild animals and a little bit more like a domestic animal. And ultimately, these animals will basically stop being, you know, true locality boas unless we have, you know, wild unrelated genes that can be introduced. So they want to create a white list of species that can be imported. So basically they're going to define, these are the species of animals that we will allow to be imported. And this is likely to just be your standard domestic animals, dogs, cats, sheep, goats, horses, etc., that humans have been working with for thousands of years. Anything they deem exotic is not going to be added to this white list. You know, and this is everything, not just reptiles. This is, you know, exotic birds, insects, tropical fish, etc. It's scary when they're just sweeping legislation which would basically ban import of anything that's not on this white list. And so then the fourth is that the Fish and Wildlife Service will not allow importation if a species has not been imported in minimal quantities in the year prior to enactment of this act. So basically, species that were imported just in very small amounts, as far as I understand, would not be allowed to be imported. And this is pretty much any boa constrictor, because when we have a shipment of animals from the wild, you're probably talking about a dozen animals or something. You know, the populations of locality boas in captivity are in most instances descended from a very small population of foundry animals. So you know, even if they haven't added boa constrictors as injurious to the Lacey Act, which is most likely going to happen if this passes, they can just, you know, block the importation of any new boa constrictor. So you know, just very disturbing legislation, difficult to think about. You know, sometimes we think, well, there's so many people out there with boas and with other reptiles, they can't do this. It affects tens of millions of people. You know, or you might think, well, you know, it happened a few years ago, but then it was overturned. I'm not going to worry about it. And as much as I would like not to worry about it, I was frankly a little bit shocked when the original Lacey Act listing of the 9 large constrictors went through, because this is basically making things that were completely legal are now illegal. And, you know, if somebody has a breeding population of Burmese pythons and, you know, they live in like Rhode Island or something, they can only sell babies in Rhode Island. So it's just a very insidious way of stopping, you know, breeding of species that, you know, these people deem to be, you know, not acceptable. And of course, you know, unfortunately our Congress is bought off by the lobbyists, and there's a very powerful animal rights lobby that's behind a lot of these bills, and unfortunately we really need to fight them. So what I would like you to do is go to the US ARC page, and they have instructions of what you can do. And, I don't know if this is going to work. Like I said, the Congress really only listens to the lobbyists that give them money, unfortunately. And, everyday people like myself really are, irrelevant. But what you can do is you can get in touch with your representative in Congress, and they give you, several different ways you can do this. You can call them, you can email them, which is what I did. You can fax them. And if you go to the US ARC site or to Fauna Classifieds, there's a story about it. They actually give you the text of an email. So all you have to do is you copy and paste. You copy the email, you go to the site where you can look up by zip code your representative, and then you just email them the text. It's really easy. You can just customize it, add your name at the bottom. You can change it a little bit if you want, but the letter's already written for you. So I would strongly advise, if this is of concern to you, that you go and you do this. It only took me like 5 minutes. Not sure if it's going to have any result, but at least it's something we can do. But I'm watching the story closely, because if this does go through and passes the Senate, I think things are going to unfortunately change in a very negative way. And I think that a lot of people would have to get out of breeding boa constrictors, because if they're added to the Lacey Act, there's not really a lot we can do. It's just huge overreach of government power, and yeah, just trying to hope that this doesn't pass the Congress. Anyway, not the most happy topic for one of my videos, but I feel strongly about this, and I really urge you to check out the situation, decide for yourself, and contact your representative in Congress, and maybe we'll make a difference if enough people go after their congressperson with their opinion. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions. I don't have all the answers, obviously, to issues like this. If you have any perspective or any thoughts, please comment below, because the viewers of this channel would love to hear. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Thanks for watching, and enjoy your boas for as long as we can until they're effectively illegal.